Welcome back to the Joyful Catholic Leaders Show, where you'll hear stories and insights from those who lead with faith. Be sure to like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. As the calendar turns to 2023, we thought it'd be fruitful to look back at the year that was here on the show. We are so grateful to you for listening, and to all our guests who came on this past year, from Jeff Cavins to Father Donald Calloway, to some of the St. Paul Seminary's own seminarians and leaders. What follows is a sampling from 6 of our guests in 2022. You'll hear from Rector of the St. Paul Seminary, Father Joseph Taphorn, as well as Paul Ruff, who leads the psychological counseling team here at the seminary. Both of them talked about the very important topic of mental health, both for seminarians and for Catholic priests. We also talked to the seminary's own Jeff Cavins, in addition to his work as a renowned catechist, all the great stuff he does with Ascension, the Bible in a Year, and Catechism in a Year podcasts with Father Mike Schmitz, a St. Paul Seminary alum, and all the other great work that Jeff does. He is an instructor here at the seminary. And we talked about all kinds of stuff. You can go back and listen to that episode, but wanted to share with you what Jeff's definition of a great leader is, looking at it through sort of a theological and scriptural lens. He also gives some examples of leaders from the Bible. And we also talked a little bit, kind of dovetailing off that, of what it looks like to be a great leader, but also a great follower, and kind of the true meaning of discipleship. That is very relevant in Jeff's world right now. He is also the founder of the Catechetical Institute, which is doing some great work in helping implement the local synod priorities here in the Archdiocese, and the Catechetical Institute through the seminary continues to grow. I know Jeff's proud of that as well, so we talked a little bit about discipleship. You attend the Catechetical Institute, you are sure to become a better and more activated disciple. On maybe a more serious note, we talked to Father Philip Bochansky. He is the Executive Director of Courage, which is a Catholic apostolate for those dealing with same-sex attraction. And we had a great and very important, relevant, timely conversation about homosexuality and transgenderism and the church's teaching on these topics. And he gave some really good practical advice for how Catholics can show love and show compassion toward those dealing with same-sex attraction and transgender tendencies, and kind of maybe set the record straight a little bit on Catholic teaching regarding these very hot-button issues in our culture and society today. Speaking of our culture and society today, the next guest we'll feature here on the Best of 2022 is Jason Adkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. That is sort of the political lobbying arm on behalf of the bishops here in the state of Minnesota. And right before midterm elections, had a great conversation about politics and religion with Jason. And finally, you'll hear from one of the seminary's own seminarians, a little bit redundant, but Deacon Kyle Etzel is from the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis and is set for priestly ordination in the spring of 2023. So we have officially reached the year that Deacon Kyle and a few of his classmates will become priests, which, as you can imagine, is always a very exciting time here at the seminary. Deacon Kyle shares his vocation story in that episode, which I encourage you to go back and listen to. But in this excerpt, he talks about the work that he and other seminarians have done with young adults, both here on campus and out in the St. Paul community, something that's very near and dear to his heart and, frankly, crucially important for the future of the church. So I'll let you hear that from him, as well as some of our other guests from the past year. Here is the Best of 2022 edition of the Joyful Catholic Leaders Show. Today, we're joined by Father Joseph Taphorn, Rector of the St. Paul Seminary. Mental health is a big topic in our society across the board, but a particular point of emphasis for priests in this day and age. Why is that, do you think, and what's being done to ensure the mental health of seminarians and priests as they move into
I think it goes back to this insight of John Paul II that the priest and his human personality has to be a bridge to Jesus Christ. And so we would say that human formation is the foundation. If you think of the building, it's like the building blocks. And if the humanity is, and everybody has their stuff, right? I mean, welcome to the human race. We know the effects of original sin. we certainly see in our culture today just challenges growing up, and whether it may be issues from home, broken homes, or whatever it is. There's just a lot of stuff in our culture that makes it hard to be well integrated and healthy. Anxiety's on the rise, depression's on. This is just not just among young people or seminarians, but just across our whole world.
Yeah.
The effects of the internet, the effects of screens. I don't think in some ways we'll even sort of know sort of the impact of all this probably for some time to come. But we certainly are seeing it, and I do think that the young men entering seminary in any age are products of their age. So it looks different today than it did when I was a young person, and when I was young, it was different than it was, the generation ahead of me. So how can the church today not see this as, a weighty problem, but actually an opportunity? How can we help these men to mold their human personality in such a way that they can maintain healthy relationships? Because in order to mediate Jesus Christ, it always happens through our humanity. So the field of psychology has become very important, and not just sort of a pop psychology or a psychology that's kind of a self-help or something, but really grounded in a Christian anthropology with a Catholic lens, knowing the role of grace, knowing the role of forgiveness that needs to happen, knowing that we are weak. But again, really just kind of leaning into the opportunities to grow with God's help and grace to become really the man that God wants each person to be. And so we're just really blessed with an outstanding psychologist who knows what it means to be a Catholic therapist and psychologist, and to kind of take the stigma away. I do think having someone on faculty, in the formation faculties, interacting with the guys, giving formation conferences, has his door open, can do one-on-one, can do groups, can just do a little check-in. One thing that we've started doing now is, it happened for many years, the church has always had sort of standard psychological tests before admittance into seminary. Used to be kind of thought, well, this will kind of weed out someone who's just clinically, who's just maybe crazy, and there's better words than that, and that's not obviously a technical word.
Sure.
But now it's really used as a growth opportunity. So this is a tool, and what does this reveal about yourself? So there's kind of formal meetings where the new seminarian can meet with our psychologist, go through the psychological report, meet with the formator. What does this suggest for areas of growth? So we don't see it as kind of a negative thing, a hoop you have to jump through just to kind of get ordained, but actually we're about the business of growth. And that goes, again, throughout our entire life. And that should be the case, again, really in any profession. I just think it's a privileged atmosphere in the seminary where there can be the fraternal support, the sacramental support, the prayer support, and it really is a place that even if a man doesn't end up being ordained ultimately, all seminarians are going to be growing and will become, I think, better men because of the process, whether they end up maybe going to be married and having a family or going into the world in some way. It's just a great opportunity to grow and mature.
We are honored and privileged to be joined by Paul Ruff, Director of Counseling Services at the St. Paul Seminary here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Just at a high level, Paul, why is it so important for seminarians to focus on their mental health in this way?
And maybe I'll give a little bit of sort of arc of sort of how mental health things are included in the discernment process as well as in the preparation process of human formation. For many, many years, for decades now, and I used to do some of them, there's been a psychological assessment process for any man who's come
into the seminary.
And so before I was in-house, I used to do those. Now that I'm in-house, I don't do those. We've got other fine people doing them. So we've always wanted to make sure the church believes that the spiritual builds on the human, and that we've got a good foundation inside the man. Not that he has to be flawless or doesn't have some issues he's bringing in, but they have to not be grave impediments to being able to really partake freely in a formation process. He has to be able to make himself available in that way. So we really do a lot of vetting of the men through Father Bloom and his fine work in the vocation office. For a man even to get advanced for recommendation to us, he's gone through quite a number of steps, including a very intensive psychological assessment that looks at his developmental history, sexual history, general psychological testing parameters around intelligence, and looking for any possible pathology. And then we meet as a team to admit the man. Often on admission, we'd say this guy makes the cut. He can definitely use a formation program and contribute as a member of a formation community in positive ways. But here's a couple of flagged areas. Maybe some family of origin issues where there are particular upsets in the developmental history around divorce or around a parent who maybe had some particular struggles with mental health themselves or alcohol. So there may be those pieces. And then the messiness of just being a person who develops as a young person in our culture. How have they made sense out of themselves and their life up to now? And where do they might need a little bit of support in that? Issues around anxiety are quite common.
Yeah.
We have a group now that is really for people learning how to manage anxiety in more effective ways. Some issues around depression, and then some issues around interpersonal capacities. Can this person really be a bridge and not an obstacle? And what parts of him, none of us are completely pure bridges in bringing people to Christ, but what parts of the man might be strengthened or fortified or healed through some counseling, as well as all the very, very essential spiritual and communal formation work that we do with men. It's become more common in seminaries now, and I think will become increasingly common to have a psychologist. I think there was a time in the church back in the 70s and 80s where the church stepped aside and let the psychological be too predominant.
Sure.
Then I think there was a pushback, and rightly so, against that the psychologist should never be the last voice about a man's discernment. But he can be an interesting and helpful voice in terms of helping people understand the capacities the man has and doesn't have. So I think we're brought in as a support to the other formation that's going on. And the intellectual formation, the spiritual formation, the pastoral formation are every bit as much and more in the forefront. I'd say we're more working on the foundation of being able to help a man with some remedial areas of development and growth.
Sure. You mentioned the psychological assessment. This may be more of an operational question, but are those pretty standard from diocese to diocese? So at our, the St. Paul Seminary or St. John Vianney College Seminary in town here, even you've got double-digit different dioceses sending. So is there some differences from diocese to
There
diocese?
are some differences, and there's differences in terms of availability for a testing psychologist and assessment psychologist.
Sure.
And there's differences about what tools are used in different areas. Sure. So we do have a standard protocol that we send out and a standard assessment mock-up that we've given, redacted from any names of this is what the product should look like, this is what we're looking for. So everyone knows what we're looking for, everybody knows our preferred instruments. Not everyone's able to comply with every piece of that. Sometimes when a man comes in, we say, we still need to do this piece.
Sure.
The Rorschach we found nationally, by national standards, is an important piece. A lot of places don't have those capacities. So we will often refer a man to complete that after he's here, if we see reason that could answer some questions for us.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. So that's sort of up front. How about once guys are in the seminary? What should they be focusing on? What resources are available to them? And how does the mental health piece of it work during this very formative time? And what should set the stage for their priesthood, God willing? Yes.
One process that we've started the last couple of years, the man has done all this investment in a psychological workup. And now psychological workups aren't magic x-rays of a person's capacities, but they do give some information. And often the man went through at a time where he was looking to hear, did I make the cut or not?
Right.
And wasn't able to take in the nuances of that. So dioceses have invested in that instrument. The man's invested his time. So I sit down, or one of our other therapists sits down, one of our other counselors sits down with the man, reviews the psychological assessment, and says, do you understand this? What parts do you agree with, disagree with? And then what does this tell you about what some targets for your formational work might be? And then we help the man convey that to his formator, the person who oversees his, what we call the external formation at the seminary. Those have been very helpful meetings, I think, both for the men to start to get a sense of reflectively how to think about their growth. Not am I okay or not, but what are the areas of growth that I could target? What further assessment, what might we need? There's a couple of men with specific learning disabilities we're discovering that really haven't been as fully assessed as they need to be. So we're looking at how do we target services for men who are intellectually very capable but have been handcuffed by that. For other men, there might be issues around family of origin issues that they really want to spend some time with a counselor unraveling. I have been very moved and edified by the lack of stigma for taking part in counseling at our seminary. I think this younger cohort, this generation, is generally more open to the possibility, and we never want it to be driving the process.
Yeah.
But I think they really are willing to avail themselves and come forward quite transparently. So most of the men at the seminary come in to see one of us, and it could be once, it could be many times. But really with specific purposes of what are the impediments that I need to get out of the way so I can be that bridge, so I can be the joyful Catholic leader instead of a man who's kind of struggling under some burden that really deserves to be resolved and the man deserves more freedom from.
Today we are joined by Jeff Cavin. You spend a lot of time and have spent a lot of time around leaders throughout the church and throughout the world. In your mind and in your experience and looking at it through the theological and scriptural lens that you said you soaked in, what makes a good, authentic leader for today's church?
Sure. Well, I think a good leader in today's church is a person who, like Jesus, a person who loves people. A good leader loves people. A good leader, if you love people, you will care for people, you'll watch out for people, you'll listen to people and their views and what they have to say. So I think a good leader is someone who has a vision, and they have a gift for being able to carry out that vision by working with the right people to get that done. And they don't care who gets the credit. When you're a leader and you're all caught up in you're the thing, you're it, that's usually a poor leader, because their leadership tends to come back around to themselves rather than to the Lord and His vision, and to help people become all that God has called them to be. I think in one word I would say a leader is magnanimous. A leader is not, there's an opposite word that we don't use very often, pusillanimous, but a magnanimous person is a person who gives freely. And you want to work with people so that they can do what God has called them to do. And I think a leader keeps a team on point, that there's so much noise out there in the world right now. And you can get caught off guard, and you can go down trails, rabbit trails, and all kinds of things. But keeping your eyes on Jesus and being a doer of the word, not just a declarer, not someone who's just saying it, but you do it. All of that really goes into being I think a great leader. And the epitome, of course, is Jesus.
Sure.
Jesus was a great leader.
Absolutely. When you look through your Bible timeline, lots of examples of very good, strong leadership and lots of examples of failed leadership. What themes about leadership, kind of come out in the Bible, would you say? Or what does the Bible have to teach us about?
In the Bible, you have all kinds of examples of leadership. I think one of the first people that we have, of course, is Noah. And Noah was a leader, and he was a leader of 3 sons and their wives. And God had basically had it with this creation, was going to start over, and He worked with Noah. And Noah, in the face of opposition, certainly during that time, built an ark. It's like, why are you building an ark? Well, just am, because God told me to. It didn't make sense, but well, what are you going to do with the ark? Well, we'll see, But he was a great leader. I think Abraham was a tremendous leader. In fact, the scripture says that one of the reasons God chose Abram to be the father of this people, the Hebrews, was that he taught his children. And that's part of being a great leader, is to live your life as though there is one God, and you're going to teach your children. So, his leadership skills really were developed to the point where, for us as modern day Christians, he's our father in faith too. And then Moses was a great leader, and Moses learned about delegation. That he found that he was overworked, he was burnt out, and God said, "Well, let's give the responsibility to 70 other people." Now, you and I might say, give it to 2 or 3, but 70, that must have been a lot that he was doing, and he did that. There are also examples of good leaders that were bad fathers, like David. David was an amazing king and a leader, certainly the epitome of what it meant to be a king in Israel, but yet his own sons, like Absalom, and his own sons, it didn't fare so well, you know. And sometimes you see that in the world today, where you see men or women who are great leaders in corporate America and lousy leaders at home. The translation isn't made there. Isaiah was a great leader in the Old Testament. Hosea was a great leader in the New Testament. And so you have a lot of good examples. But then in the New Testament, you have the two super saints, the super apostles, Peter and Paul, and both had really different leadership styles. And Paul went to the Gentiles and Peter to the Jews, and just different leadership styles, and we can learn so much from them. The Blessed Virgin Mary was a leader. The epitome of leadership, but back to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Recording today on the feast of the conversion of St. Paul, too,
Right.
so a nice tie-in there. When you're looking at it from a Catholic perspective, I suppose it'd be fair to say that to be a good leader, you also need to be a follower. You need to be a disciple, right? And you've done a good job in your work and your ministry, really kind of breaking down and defining discipleship, not just, the textbook definition, but how to live that out. Walk us through that a little bit. How do you kind of break down and frame up discipleship? What does it mean to be a disciple in this day and age?
Well, that's a good question. What does it mean to be a disciple in the modern era, or what I would call an activated disciple?
Yes.
When you go back and you look at the relationship between Jesus and his followers, a lot of times we don't look at what that relationship looked like. We don't look at the actual relationship between the rabbi and the disciple. And I was very blessed in that, I left the Catholic Church. That's not why I was blessed, but I left the Catholic Church in my early 20s, and I was immersed into a whole decade of studying the early church in Jerusalem with some of the greatest teachers from Hebrew University and around the United States. And I was able to see the relationship between Jesus, the rabbi, and the disciples who are Talmidim, or their disciples. And what you have there is you don't have a charismatic leader simply giving talks around the country, and people are like, I like his style, I want to follow this guy. This guy's pretty cool,
Yeah.
That isn't what this is about at all. But what it's about is the rabbi-disciple relationship, and that is that a rabbi actually invited a small number of people to be around him for a 3 to 5, 6, 7 year period where he would teach them, and they would observe him, and they would eventually go out and make disciples of their own in this vein of thought. And so the average number of disciples that a rabbi had in Jesus' day was 5. And Jesus, of course, had 12 for theological reasons, 12 tribes. The great Hillel had 70, and most of the other ones had, like Gamliel had 5 to 8 disciples, which Paul was a disciple of the great Gamliel. It mentions in today's reading on this feast of Paul. So the idea of being a disciple is one who is chosen, and you respond to being chosen by saying, yes, I will be with you, Jesus. And the goal of that is for you to become like Jesus. But you can't become like Jesus unless you are with Jesus. And so this now is going to be an invitation to live with him, to observe him, to obey him. And the end goal here is that you will be like your master. You'll be like the master. So discipleship is a lifestyle. Discipleship is forming your entire life around Jesus. Another way to put it is that the shape of your day is influenced by the love of your life. So if you're into football, the shape of your day will reflect it. If you love skiing, the shape of your day will reflect it. If you love Texas Hold'em, the shape of your day will reflect it. But if you are completely and utterly in love with Jesus Christ, the shape of your day will reflect it. It's not just a thought, which is what I would call kind of regular Christianity out there, that, oh yeah, I agree with him and I really like his style, but it's more of I'm going to order my whole life around him. And that's what a disciple is. And so I think of myself, number one, as a disciple of Jesus. And then from there, I am a husband who is a disciple. I'm a father who's a disciple, a grandfather, a teacher to seminary as a disciple of Jesus. And that's something that nobody can take from you.
Delighted and honored to be joined by Father Philip Bochansky, Executive Director of Courage International, which is an apostolate for men and women with same-sex attraction and those who love them. Catholic teaching on homosexuality and transgenderism is well documented, but often misunderstood. Fair? Probably agree with that statement?
I agree with that, for sure.
Let's start with one common misconception. Can you pray the gay away? Is that possible?
Well, aside from whether it's even possible, it's certainly not what the Catholic Church expects people to even try to do. There's really important distinctions that the Church makes in its teaching about sexual morality in general and homosexuality in particular. We distinguish the person, who's always good because we're created in the image and likeness of God, from that person's inclinations or desires or emotions, and that person's actions. So the Church's teaching is clear that sexual actions between people of the same sex are always immoral, always wrong, because they're always excluding complementarity, the relationship between man and woman, and they're always excluding the possibility of procreativity. However, while the Church's teaching is clear on actions, the Church is equally clear that to experience an attraction or desire is not a sin, not in itself, right? We have to be responsible for not putting ourselves in situations for our desires to be stirred up. We need to make good decisions about what we do with our desires and how we feel, but it's not a sin to feel a feeling. So there's not any sense in which the Church expects or would require or obligate anybody to, as the saying goes, pray the gay away, right? And we don't have to become straight in order to be holy and to be a saint. This is where we are separated from evangelical Christians who would see that as a sin in itself. So, yeah, I think we have to start with understanding where the Church is coming from on that. The other thing, too, is it doesn't just affect people who are living with this experience themselves, but it becomes an issue for their families, too, right? Because we have to help parents to understand that it's not about fixing the situation with their child or with their family, but learning to love one another in the context of this experience, which affects everybody in the family so deeply. So I'm not a psychologist. It'd be a little bit out of my lane to say, does therapy help a person to understand himself or herself better and have an effect on their feelings and attractions? I think in some cases, maybe they can head in that direction, but to start out with that as a goal often doesn't help the person to find what they're looking for. But more importantly than that, the Church isn't requiring or expecting anybody to do anything to change their attractions. The Church is simply trying to help us all to orient our behavior along God's plan for sexuality and relationships.
Sure. So I think you kind of did this in a sense, but how might one easily just sort of summarize the elevator pitch for Catholic Church teaching on homosexuality and articulate it to somebody who isn't familiar with this teaching?
Well, it goes back to God, the way that God creates us, right? Genesis 1:27. God creates us in his image and according to his likeness, and male and female. And so to be in the image of God means we're made for relationship. To be in the likeness of God means our relationships have to be based on a sincere gift of self, a total gift of self. And then in the same breath that the Scripture reveals that we're made for loving relationships, it reveals that we're male and female, which means everything about our sexuality, our bodies, what we can do with our bodies, our desires and attractions, relationships, and intimate actions, all of that is evaluated based on, is this leading me to live out my primary vocation, which is to make a sincere gift of myself in a loving relationship. So when a relationship is based on that truth from the Scripture, that we're male and female, so complementarity, and that because we're male and female, we can follow God's very first commandment to human beings, which is be fruitful and multiply, that the love which God blesses between man and woman is intended to be fruitful. Then we realize that, well, it's intended to be fruitful because that love is supposed to be an image of God's love, which is permanent and faithful. Well, then we have the context for God's plan or purpose for sexual intimacy And it's holy and good and fulfilling when it's in the context of a permanent, faithful relationship, marriage, between where the two people are complementary in nature, man and woman, and their relations are open to having children. Okay. Whenever the church has to say that a particular action or relationship or desire is immoral or not what God wants, it's applying that set of criteria, right? So adultery, fornication, pornography, masturbation, contraception, they're all wrong for the same reason, which is that some part of that plan, permanence, faithfulness, complementary procreativity, is missing. And when you take something out of that plan, then it has a serious impact on the spiritual life and the relationship of the people involved. Okay, so where does the church's teaching on homosexuality come from? Same place, because sexual relations between people of the same sex are always, they're not complementary. The two people have the same bodily and sexual nature, and they can't by their nature be procreative. That when those things are missing, people certainly love one another, they certainly have affection and care for one another, but to make that into a sexual relationship is not going to get them where they want to go, because we perceive and believe that complementary procreativity really have to be part of a sexual relationship for it to be fulfilling and holy in God's plan.
Today we're joined by Jason Adkins, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Has politics replaced religion in the American consciousness?
That's a really great question, and a lot of people that politics has taken on a quasi-religious role. I think one way to think about it, Phil, is that we have to start from the premise that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart, and that's a line from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. When you understand that reality, it's harder to other the other, if you will, or look at the evil in the world fundamentally being outside or somewhere else. And I think that's why politics has taken on this quasi-religious dimension. No longer do we focus the struggle between good and evil within our own lives. We see the battle between good and evil as forces outside of us duking it out. The problem is always somewhere out there. It's never, right here. Who crucified our Lord? I did. You did. So I think that's part of the problem is with secularization, we've lost the sense of where that ultimate battle between good and evil lies, and that it's in our own heart and with the struggle against sin, and not some sort of forces led by some other team, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, whatever. Really, that battle between good and evil starts within the human heart. And when you have that sense of it, then you're less likely to give politics sort of a quasi-religious or spiritual dimension.
Joined by Deacon Kyle Etzel, seminarian and transitional deacon. You know, he's a pretty down-to-earth, relatable guy. You've used this in a variety of ways during your time in seminary, which I think is really cool. You've had opportunities to fulfill that desire to reach out to young adults that you were talking about with Father Tollefson and others. Tell me about Beads and Beers and some of the stuff you've been doing at St. Mary's in Lower Town, St. Paul, and then Cor Jesu here at the seminary as well.
Well, yeah, these are good. It's dangerous to call a down-to-earth guy down-to-earth to his face, because it can ruin the down-to-earthness. Like, let it go to my head.
You're going far too deep
I'm not.
for me now.
I don't. No,
it
won't go to my head. I have a mustache on my face right now, so
Yeah.
nothing can go to my head too much.
Well, I do think, like, not to get too far off on a tangent, but I do think there is a stigma about seminarians sometimes of, like, they're very pious, they fit a certain mold and cookie cutter, and I think a lot of people, even Catholics, are surprised when they actually hang out with you guys and meet you, and it's not just a Deacon Kyle, like, just how normal and relatable you guys are. And everyone's different,
Yeah,
Everyone's
different is like the Minnesota way of saying, like, there's, like, we're weird too. Like, not in, like, any bad way, but like we read stuff for fun that, like, normal people would, like,
weird.
Be put to sleep by,
That's weird.
So there's stuff like that. That's like, it's like low key weird, not threatening weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, most seminarians are pretty normal. We don't really do weird, which is Father Tapwarden's favorite saying. But I don't think it was recently pointed out to me that there's kind of been this, like, weird break in the church's view of, I don't know, clergy or something, where it's like, if you're pious or or whatever that, people have like these weird definitions for pious, which is like piety is actually
Piety's
a virtue.
actually a really good thing.
Yeah, but like it's a word we use to describe like sort of like pompous or stuffy or like holier than thou.
Yeah, holier than thou would probably be a better
so
phrase, right, piety?
so like you're either that or you're pastoral, which has been like used to describe like you're just nice.
Yeah.
Which is also not what pastoral is. Pastoral is like, I'm willing to like walk with you toward the Lord, whatever that means.
Yeah.
That might mean lifting you up when you're down on yourself. It might mean correcting you because you're doing something dumb.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the seminary, like I know seminarians, know a lot of them. I think most seminarians today are trying to heal that rupture a little bit and bring the pastoral and the pious kind
it's a
of
false
back
dichotomy,
together.
right?
Yeah, right,
if
right.
you pull those
like,
together,
I guess like they're
that
trying
has the
to
makings of a really great priest.
they're trying
that's
to
what I would want.
uncover the real thing, which both of these things are not, but they're trying to uncover the like, look, actually the church has taught that this should be the way the whole time.
Yeah.
So you can't be cold and unfeeling, because that's being a crappy pastor.
Yeah.
But you also can't just like throw out the teaching of the church or good liturgy or beauty. Like we need those things too. So it's not a war. It's both of those things are needed, and I think that's really. I think there's a lot of down to earth seminarians.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm down to earth, man, there's a lot better guys over there than I am. So.
Sure.
Yeah,
So I took us down a tangent there, but
that's okay.
Your young adult work.
Yes, young
Beads
adult
and
work.
Beers,
Yeah,
Cor
Beads and
Jesu.
Beers, Cor Jesu, St. Mary's. Yeah, so Beads and Beers started out just like, I guess it was last year we started doing some of these, and it was just kind of a walking rosary. It wasn't called Beads and Beers until this summer. It was just like a walking rosary in Lowertown, which is a really clunky title. And it usually resulted in stopping at Barrel Theory at 7th and Wakota in Lowertown, St. Paul, for a beer afterwards. But that wasn't like necessarily always a part of it. But it this group just sort of coalesced. And I don't think it's ever been exactly the same crew, but there's like regulars.
Yeah.
And they regularly bring others. Some of them, regular, devout young adult Catholic types. Sometimes atheists, or whoever their friends are.
Wow.
One of our regulars, who I won't name because he would be upset with me if I did, but he's in RCAA. But when he started coming to Beads and Beers, it was like a hardcore Protestant, like
wow,
like very, very smart and like deep in like Protestant theology and studying the fathers, which is always sort of can become a hairy situation for a Protestant because those church fathers, they can be dangerous.
Right.
But it was like the first time I've ever seen a Protestant like pray the rosary. But it's just because he'd met young adult Catholics who were serious about Christ, and he didn't have any questions about that. And he's like, well, if it seems good to them and it's scriptural, Hail Marys are 90% scripture, right? Seems good to me.
Yeah.
Now he's in RCAA.
Beautiful.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like the Beads and Beers thing really is just kind of the how do you like save the third space? We used to have like the parish was like the place where the community gathered. You had your home and you had, like whatever kind of the VFW or something, and then you had the parish. And like they were all like where the community came together to love on each other and, keep involved in each other's lives. And the parish sort of like lost that position, or the VFW, like these old, places intended for gathering.
Yeah.
But I think at least in the Twin Cities, the brewery has really like become that spot.
Oh yeah.
Like people gather, they're not looking at you don't go to a brewery and see people sitting in the corner scrolling on their phone. Or if you do, it's like, oh, that's a weird guy who's over here by himself at the brewery looking at his phone.
Some other things
people are there to socialize and be with their friends.
You're right.
And so that's the place we have to be.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. It might not be the brewery. Maybe it's a bowling alley, or if those still exist, or or whatever. So, but we have to be willing to go into those places. But you also have to be ready to receive the people who you meet in those places, which is kind of the idea of Cor Jesu, where the seminary, opens itself up to facilitate an encounter with the Lord for young adults in the Twin Cities. So that's like the other part of my heart, right? Like I love going out. I mean, I like drinking beer with cool people, but like the best part about Beads and Beers,
in my innermost being,
right?
I want to be at a brewery.
Well, some of the time
I
that's
can
just
relate
the
to
truth.
that.
Yeah, but
you're talking about meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, you go out,
going out to them.
Yeah,
which is what Christ did, right?
Right.
From town to town,
right?
People where they're at.
But if all you ever do is go out and meet people where they're at, like, great. Now what?
Yeah.
Hey, have you met Jesus?
Right.
Like
the come follow me.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So
come in at some point.
And I think events like Cor Jesu are like the perfect complement to events like Beads and Beers, where it's like we're at this like low intensity place. We're having a beer, hopefully a good one together. We might not even be talking about super serious stuff. Might just be like, yeah, this is Deacon Kyle. We're having a beer together. We're talking about F1 racing because Deacon Kyle weirdly likes F1 racing. But then at the end of the night, I'm like, hey, next Friday we're having this super cool thing. There'll be some good music and Jesus will be there. And if you feel like, praying with some people, or if you're Catholic, going to confession, you can do that too.
Yeah.
But not high pressure. That's what Cor Jesu is. We've just been doing it for 15 years. But other than that, it's not like a super instituted or like high pressure thing of any kind. So
we're not handing out pamphlets.
Yeah, we're not trying to. There's no offertory. We're not trying. We're not passing the basket around. We're like, you don't have to even stay for the whole thing.
Yeah, just an open invitation.
It's great to invite people to Mass, but the Mass is like a ritual that is very intimate and beautiful, but can be very intimidating. Yeah. And in its beauty, it can be. I mean, it's hard to say that there's anything more able to convert a heart than like a Mass reverently celebrated. But we're not limited, and these kind of low intensity, like high openness, big invitation type things, I think are kind of really a part of how we can really work like in evangelizing in this age.
All right, that is a wrap for our Best of 2022 edition of the Joyful Catholic Leaders Show. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts and follow the St. Paul Seminary on social media and at stpaulseminary.org. On behalf of all of us at the St. Paul Seminary, we wish you a very blessed 2023. As always, thank you so much for listening, and may God bless you.